Hello, my name is Paul Fagan. I'm the Director of the Human Rights and Democracy Programs here at the McCain Institute. We are very happy that you could join us today on our latest event, Why North Macedonia Should Join the European Union Next and Why It Matters. This is a great topic for the McCain Institute to discuss because, as you know, Senator John McCain was one of the biggest champions of European integration, the Transatlantic Alliance, and the NATO Alliance. As the European Union seeks to expand into Ukraine and Moldova, several Western Balkan nations have waited their chance at further European integration. Of these, North Macedonia is the newest member of the NATO Alliance and is eager to join the EU. But North Macedonia has been a target of hostile disinformation campaigns, mostly coming from Russia and other third parties. And this could create some instability in the southeastern flank of NATO. So why should North Macedonia be the next official candidate for European ascension? And why does it matter to the Western Balkans and Europe as a whole? Today, we've assembled a great panel. I'm really excited to introduce them. First, we have the Deputy Prime Minister, Bojan Maričić. He's the Deputy Prime Minister for European Affairs of North Macedonia. Thank you for joining us. Next, we have the U.S. Ambassador to North Macedonia, Ambassador Kate Marie Burns. Really appreciate you joining us as well. And then finally, our own Evelyn Farkas. She is the Executive Director here at the McCain Institute. So thank you, Dr. Farkas, for joining us today. So I'm going to kick this off by asking all of you a series of questions. And we're going to start with you, Deputy Prime Minister Maričić. And I think, you know, this is an apropos time to talk about North Macedonia as the newest member of NATO, as it's starting its accession talks of the EU. But you are celebrating 31 years of independence. As the Vice Prime Minister in charge of European affairs, what have been the biggest accomplishments over the past 30 years? And what are the challenges remaining for North Macedonia in its accession talks with the EU?
Thank you, Paul, Mr. Fagan, Madam Ambassador. It is my great pleasure to be one of the speakers at this discussion organized by McCain Institute. It's a real honor to me. And I think it's timely to discuss on the onset of the celebrations for our 31st anniversary since we are an independent country since 1991. The strategic goal and political orientation of our country, North Macedonia, is clear and quite stone solid. We have become a member of NATO, the strongest military alliance, and have finally started the accession negotiations with the European Union after being for 17 years in the waiting room. We deeply believe that we have made the right choice and that we are on the right side of history, not only North Macedonia as a country, but also the implications of our strategic priorities for the region and for the EU as well. Particularly in these times, speaking about achievements in the context of the Russian aggression to Ukraine. You know, 4 years ago, when we became a member of NATO, some of the criticizers and opponents of the agreement with Greece, of the Prespa agreement, were saying, is it worth it? Do we really need to do this? Is the price acceptable? But today, we are a NATO ally, and we have the applications of Finland and Sweden, powerful developed countries who would like to join the club where we are already members. I think that today we got the answer that this was worth it and this was the right thing to do because we believe in these values and principles since our independence, regardless of all the hardships we have faced. One of our goals is achieved. As I mentioned, we are made members of NATO. The second one, strategic, a full-fledged membership of the European Union is yet to be achieved. The pace with which we move forwards depends now, after we have resolved the issue with Bulgaria, depends solely on us. The European Union's credibility, I have to say, has been put at stake in the past several years, as the enlargement process has been stalled, and that has had clear consequences on the image of the European Union in this region. In fact, all the public polls have confirmed one unpleasant fact: decline in the support for European integration. Although it is still very high, it is close to 70%, but it has been 90 and over 10 years ago. And that is becoming a leitmotif used by our adversaries and the EU geopolitical competitors for influence in this region. This is why we wanted to take this big decision and to move forward, because we think that EU is still a peace project, because this is otherwise we wouldn't have a question whether Ukraine is important to be part of it or not. But I can tell you that we were a success story, and we would like to go on being a success story in this region. We were the only country who didn't have participated in the wars of the 90s of Yugoslavia. We were the first from our region to sign the Stabilization and Association Agreement back in 2001, and first to cut the interethnic conflict in 2001 with the Ohrid Framework Agreement before it gets worse, like in Bosnia or Kosovo. We applied for membership in the European Union in 2004 and became a candidate country in 2005. And ever since, we have had positive recommendations since 2009. And finally, after resolving the bilateral issues with our neighbors, Greece over the name and Bulgaria over the reading of some elements of the history, now we have the open path to move forward. This is certainly not a gift, but well-deserved achievement of all generations that invested time, energy, efforts, and everything to bring our country to that point. During the last 2.5 decades, North Macedonia has gone through a very heavy but EU-oriented reform process. No single angle of our society has remained the same, particularly in the past 5-6 years. To recapitulate, our legal and institutional system, our trade relations and business connections, foreign direct investments, and our industrial technology are strongly and long-lastingly related to the EU. I can give you one example. 70% of our trade is related to the European Union. Although the countries of the Western Balkans have clearly, and some of them unequivocally, expressed their Euro-Atlantic aspirations, the Union or some member states have shown indecision or hesitation, which in a way was an invitation to third countries and global aspirants to show their true and not so peaceful intentions that they have had for this area for centuries. And I believe this is clear to everyone, particularly after the invasion of Ukraine, that it will not be an end of Russia's aspirations, but might be a pretext for China's increased aggression in what it considers to be sphere of influence in the Western Balkans. We can proudly confirm once again that we stand together with our Euro-Atlantic partners, and as a member of NATO, and as a stronger ever aspirant for full-fledged EU membership. We stand without slightest doubt against all forms of and acts of aggression and violence as the Russian aggression to Ukraine is. And we were the first to embrace the EU sanctions against Russia, and one of the first to dismiss 11 Russian diplomats from the Russian embassy here in Skopje. Thank you so much, and I am ready for this.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. I think you painted a broad picture of a lot of the accomplishments that were made by North Macedonia over the past 30 years, and stated a great case for your ascension into the EU. And let me turn it over to Ambassador Burns. You've been an ambassador for the past 3 years. It's been a difficult time. You've overseen the position during a global pandemic and invasion on European soil. But North Macedonia remains an important ally to the United States. Why do you think it's still important for North Macedonia? Maybe we'll just focus on North Macedonia, and we'll get to the Western Balkans later. But in its ascension to the EU, I'm going to just turn it over to you for your comments.
Great. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you to the McCain Institute, Dr. Farkas, for having this event today. And it is an honor to join the Deputy Prime Minister in this conversation. I think he has done an excellent job of outlining how clearly this country has been focused on the goal of Euro-Atlantic integration now for decades. And I would say that from the United States perspective, we have always seen the future of this country as part of Europe, fully integrated into the institutions. And the work that we've done successively over the years has been focused on that effort. It was well briefed to me that, one of Senator McCain's last overseas tour was here to the Western Balkans in 2017. That still resonates here, and it reflected an extended period of time of bipartisan support for seeing the Western Balkans fully integrated into Europe. Now, during my mandate, we've actually seen some of that progress be realized, and it's primarily through the hard work, the Deputy Prime Minister, of others here, the people of North Macedonia in particular, to realize that goal from which they've never wavered, but to make tangible progress. So there have been challenges, as you pointed out, in terms of the pandemic, in terms of the economy, issues with energy, and now more recently, Russia's attack on Ukraine, which has just upended so many challenges for us. But what we've seen happen here is a consolidation and a realization of those goals that is pretty powerful. And for the United States, the EU accession of North Macedonia is very much a part of this bigger picture. We see the future of Europe as a unified bloc of democracies that shares the same strategic values and strategic goals. So while the EU accession process is a European process, it is primarily important to the United States because it helps deliver on that promise, not only of a North Macedonia that is vibrant, resilient, prosperous, but of a Balkans regions that is the same, and more importantly, a Europe that has that resiliency, that prosperity moving forward, so that it can be a strong partner of the United States. And I think it's, as the Deputy Prime Minister said, a very timely moment to have this conversation, because even with all of the challenges out there, there are now real opportunities. I think the EU accession process offers additional opportunities to help continue the exact kind of efforts that will promote regional stability and prosperity across the board. The EU process is one set of mechanisms that will help, and it will continue that. I will say that what we have seen, and it was a proud moment for me to be here when North Macedonia joined formally the NATO Alliance, we have seen them not only just step up as a good NATO ally, but a stalwart, steady NATO ally, even when challenged by the most current circumstances by Russia and Ukraine. For a country this size, it has been disproportionately strong in its response. It is playing a leading role. It has an active voice at the table. We think that our investment in North Macedonia's journey in the NATO has already paid off. And likewise, our support for their process with the EU is also going to be a huge return on investment for the United States, as well as for the citizens of this country.
Thank you for those comments. And Deputy Prime Minister, I think both of you kind of pinpointed, the evolution that North Macedonia has gone through in its integration efforts into Europe, and at its size and place in Europe, it has been very forward-leaning. And thank you for mentioning that about Senator McCain and his commitment to the region. And this is where I want to bring in Dr. Farkas, especially talking about the Balkan region. It does remain a hotspot of instability in Europe. And from your decades of work in the region and NATO, can you kind of contextualize the regional importance, considering the Russian invasion of Ukraine? Is the United States doing enough? Are our European allies doing enough? But love to hear from you about sort of the broader picture here.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Paul, for organizing this, and to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Ambassador for agreeing to participate. Senator McCain was always focused on expanding democracy to those countries and peoples who wanted to be part of the Euro-Atlantic community, which is actually more than Euro-Atlantic, really the global community of democracies. And in the Balkans region, there has always been tension between the age-old ethnic nationalist tendencies. Obviously, we had a war not that long ago in the 1990s that, as the Deputy Prime Minister mentioned, involved most of the countries of the former Yugoslavia. And so that has been an underlying it has actually created an urgency, frankly speaking, in terms of expansion of NATO and EU into the region, because with expansion comes stability. And I think that's an important point to highlight, because oftentimes, and especially today, we tend to look at EU accession and NATO accession issues within the context of the standoff between democracies and autocracies, and specifically in Europe, the standoff with Russia. And in the case of the Balkans, while that is true, and that has again provided a new urgent reason to accelerate the accession process for both countries and for all of the countries in the region and all of the peoples of the region who want to be part of NATO and the European Union, it's also coming on top of the already long-standing reasons for wanting to expand the community of democracies, because NATO and the European Union bring political stability in the region, internally to the countries, and of course, economic development. And so I have been personally working since the 90s, since my engagement in Bosnia in the aftermath of the war, on doing everything I can to expand it. And North Macedonia really was a country that from the very beginning expressed interest in becoming part of the European Union, as the Deputy Prime Minister mentioned, was a key, played a key role in really modeling how to stay out of ethnic conflicts, although of course there are complicated ethnic politics inside of Macedonia and in the region regardless for Skopje to manage. I think that Skopje should be commended for its fantastic political engagement, especially in the last 3 or 4 years, or maybe going back a little bit further, but in any event, in the more recent phase of their development. I think the only other point that I would make, because I really would like to give the ambassador and the Deputy Prime Minister time to speak on this, is that North Macedonia came to the table with regard to the attack by terrorists against the United States on 9/11. Macedonia was, when it was called Macedonia, was actively engaged in our peace effort, in our military effort, the NATO effort, coalition effort from day one, and was with us till the very end. That's important to note. And North Macedonia really, as the ambassador mentioned, stepped up to the table in the current conflict, the current aggression that Russia is visiting upon the Ukrainian people, providing tanks and also, it appears, aircraft to assist their Ukrainian neighbors. This is something that the entire NATO and European Union community recognize and applaud and appreciate, and does put Macedonia sort of at the head of the table when it comes to recognition of Balkan countries in terms of their contribution to stability in Europe. So those are really the main points that I want to make. The Balkans are important, again, because they are part of Europe, and these people in the Balkans, the Balkan people, by and large, most of them would like to become members of the European Union, and with the exception of Serbia, NATO.
Really appreciate those comments, and again highlighting North Macedonia's dedication to the alliance, the NATO alliance, their commitment, to providing troops in Afghanistan, being one of the first, to join NATO and others in preventing more Russian aggression. And this leads me to my question to Ambassador Burns, but I'll bring in the Deputy Prime Minister after this. Earlier this summer, in June, the governments of the United States and Macedonia held a strategic dialogue in Washington. So I'd love to hear more about that bilateral meeting and what that actually means to the United States. And then let's hear from the Deputy Prime Minister and what that means for Macedonia. So over to you, Ambassador.
Thanks, Paul, for raising the strategic dialogue. So we have had, obviously, an important strategic partnership with North Macedonia for some time. We had a cooperation agreement in 2008. And over the course of many years, we had discussions about, what this really means in practice. When Assistant Secretary Donfried came to the region in April, and she visited Skopje, we sat down and we had some good discussions, and we realized that there was an opportunity to create a much broader dialogue, to build on the incredible successes that we had in the security and Paul Mill space, but to broaden the scope, broaden the aperture, and to bring more of our government partners to the table, both here in Skopje and in Washington, to talk about how we could do a lot more together, not just for our bilateral relationship, but then even potentially as two partners in addressing issues of mutual concern, whether they be geopolitical challenges or transnational threats. How could we put our resources and our partnership to the best effort? So we met in June in Washington and had the first formal meeting of the strategic dialogue, which is, of course, not just one set of meetings, but a process of looking across the board. The government of North Macedonia sent a delegation, so representatives of different ministries. We had representative from across the U.S. executive agencies and branch, not just the State Department and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but partners on many, many issues ranging from security to the environment and climate change, energy, economy, law enforcement, and even cultural and educational cooperation, so that we could think about how to expand this into a greater space. I think it was a great opportunity then to follow up and see how we can bring more partners and stakeholders to the table. And in the months and years to come, we're going to see the strategic dialogue set a sort of a framework for those kinds of conversations. Now, while the strategic dialogue isn't specifically about EU integration, because of course that's a process for the government here to work with its the EU member states, I suspect that there are going to be a lot of synergies, because the work that we do bilaterally is focused on creating the kind of strong democratic institutions, support for rule of law and anti-corruption efforts here, for better investment infrastructure, ways to address challenges in the environment and the energy sector, help the country move off of energy dependence and open up new sources that are green and renewable. And these are, again, going to assist in many of the processes that the government will be undertaking along with its EU partners. The intent of all of our programs and activities actually here in North Macedonia for many years has been keeping in mind that future of North Macedonia into the EU, to make sure that we're working in a way that is complementary to their efforts. So as they make the reforms necessary for their European future, we are working through our US programs, initiative, and activities in a way that is supportive, mutually complementary, and I think reflective of where we are in terms of the broader US-European relationship. We see ourselves in partnership as global partners as having a tremendous impact on addressing this broad array of challenges that face all of our populations and citizens. And so this U.S. North Macedonia Strategic Dialogue is a small but powerful platform within that broader construct of the U.S. and Europe working together across the Atlantic towards the same future of economic prosperity, democracy, freedoms that we all care so deeply about.
Thank you, Ambassador. And Deputy Prime Minister Maričić, can you comment on this new strategic dialogue and what it means to your country?
Thank you, Paul. I can tell you that back in 2008, when the country was about to fall into despair after the veto in the NATO summit in Bucharest, when we were supposed to become a NATO member, the strategic agreement, the strategic partnership that we have concluded with the United States at that point actually was the right thing to do, and we are very grateful for that. It was the right sign for us to keep on the right side of the story. And I can tell you that because of that strategic partnership, in spite of all the hardships, in my view, North Macedonia has always ended in all the turmoils on the right side of history. And this is why exactly I think that it was tremendously important to give a new content of this strategic partnership with this strategic dialogue framework. I think that will give new dynamics in our bilateral relations. It will, of course, increase the level of our cooperation, and it will increase the leverage of North Macedonia as a partner of US in NATO, but also bilaterally. But it will at the same time increase the leverage of the United States over the key areas that are in the strategic dialogue and that we need support for. It's true that many of these issues, particularly rule of law, and I can witness how much the United States helps us in the area of rule of law, in the area of judiciary reform, because I was also Minister of Justice some time ago. And I think that these areas of fight against corruption, implementing the rule of law principle, reform of the judiciary, vibrant market economy, and open and developed civil society is something that we developing in the area of culture and identity is something that it is very necessary for us, but it is also part of our EU agenda. This is why I think they're complementary. This is why I'm very happy that it goes on, although I am in charge and guiding the negotiations with the European Union. I closely follow and would be happy to help also all the areas in the strategic dialogue in order to be more visible, more present, and to hit the core of these issues, because we know, our country was always good in managing the good neighborly relations, managing the big key decisions, but we still need help to develop our system and make it better in the area of fight against corruption, rule of law, and judicial reform.
That's an important segue. And Dr. Farkas, I want to bring you in here about those efforts needed to better perform as a NATO member, as an EU member. We've seen unprecedented support for NATO over the past, since the beginning of this year, since the invasion. But for many years, NATO popularity lagged. Many people in the United States and, I'd say Western Europe, it was very unpopular or just non-existent. But now it has seen a surge of popularity throughout the region. But there are areas that each country, especially in the Balkans, need to do more to strengthen whether it's their militaries, their democracies. What are some of those things that you see for this region and broader Europe that current NATO members and future NATO members can do to secure the alliance, essentially?
Right. Well, Paul, first and foremost, obviously, NATO is an alliance of democracies. So everything that North Macedonia and all of the Balkan countries are doing in their attempt to become members of, in their accession to the European Union, and also just as EU members, bolsters them as NATO members. And what I mean by this is, in particular, civilian control of the military. That's an important component of being a democracy and also of becoming a NATO member and remaining a NATO member in good standing, and certainly of the European Union. Anti-corruption, which includes, of course, the military and defense industry. And then I think there's a lot of reform that's necessary in the Balkans in order to bring all of the countries of the region up to NATO military standards. And part of this work, frankly, needs to involve the United States and the European countries as well, because for a long time, at least personally, I've felt that we need to find a way to fund the transition, and a more rapid transition, from the old Soviet era weaponry that still has been very common in the Balkans over to Western NATO interoperable systems. Of course, it's expensive, which is why we and the other NATO allies need to be funding this, helping the Balkan countries make that transition. But I guess one of the silver linings, if you can even call it that, of the current phase of the war against Ukraine being waged by Russia, is that the Balkan countries are now providing this old Soviet era equipment to Ukraine, which then means, of course, that especially for those that are NATO members, the NATO Alliance now has to step into the breach and help them find replacements. And again, thankfully, it appears that those replacements now are the U.S. and other Western European systems. So those are a few things that we can focus on, and that NATO members from the Balkans can focus on. Certainly, there's also training that is important, to maintain skills and to keep them up to the proper level. And then I think for Balkan countries, again, to continue to provide assistance to NATO members across the board. I would also say that, we've seen the Scandinavian countries, so Sweden and Finland, really take advantage, I don't know if that's the right terminology, but really seize the moment and ask for NATO membership and pursue it and receive it. And it is a little bit disheartening to see that the process in the Balkans is is not proceeding like that. So what I mean by that is we continue to have Bosnia stuck. Serbia, of course, is still heavily influenced by Moscow. We need to see an acceleration on the NATO front, but then also, more importantly, on the EU front. I think that the European Union and, of course, the Balkan countries together need to really speed up the accession effort. So yes, it's good that some of the long-standing, blockages, the Bulgarian blockages, the French blockages, that's more recent, have been removed. But I would like to see something more exciting and dynamic like we've seen in the NATO context in Scandinavia.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And Ambassador, I want to bring you in here. You've been in North Macedonia. You've had a front row seat to their integration process. You were there, their accession into NATO. Now you're there for their accession into EU. And as Dr. Farkas said, we have this enthusiasm for the Scandinavian countries, Sweden and Finland, in joining NATO. How can we improve that enthusiasm for North Macedonia in its ascension process to the EU? And if there is one thing or a couple of things that you feel North Macedonia needs to do to make sure that they get over that last hurdle, what would that be?
Thank you for that. And I appreciate Dr. Farkas's comments too about NATO in particular. And I want to start with that because North Macedonia, when it decided seriously to pursue NATO membership, it made a real commitment to defense modernization as part of that effort. And so when North Macedonia joined NATO, it was in pretty impressive shape. I mean, they did a lot of work very quickly to make sure that they were up to speed. And they began the process of thinking through what kind of modernization would be necessary to be not just a member of NATO, but a strong member of NATO. And they began that process early on. The most recent events have proved that those decisions were very timely. And I was very pleased to see the arrival of 5 new joint light tactical vehicles from the United States, from Oshkosh, arrive in country and this last month, which is part of their effort to create and to build towards that NATO capability target that they will contribute to the alliance of a light infantry battalion group. So they are already moving ahead. They have a concerted plan to reach the 2% of GDP defense spending that we expect of all NATO allies, but they're already ahead in terms of the percentage of their defense budget that's being spent on modernization and thinking it through. As you noted, this is now an opportunity to complete that transformation and really to move forward. And we are very pleased to see that there has been broad support across the political spectrum and across the citizenry for continuing to make those kinds of investments. I think countries like North Macedonia should be recognized for making those kinds of decisions and investing up front in those kind of capabilities because it is important, and sooner rather than later. The other thing that is maybe not as well known about North Macedonia's contributions to NATO is the development of the Krivolak training area here. They have an exercise area that has been incredibly important to not only NATO exercises, but regional exercises. It allows for the kind of interoperable readiness exercises that a modern defense alliance needs. And North Macedonia has not only offered that up in support of bilateral, multilateral, and NATO-specific exercises, but it is developing that capability so that it will continue to be able to offer that. I think when we turn then to the effort on EU accession, we also need to recognize that making some of these smart decisions up front and investments up front are courageous, they're bold. And a country that wants to be successful in the EU accession process has got to tackle some of the toughest challenges and the most important challenges first. I think, as the Deputy Prime Minister said, it's clear that addressing issues of institutions, of rule of law, of fighting corruption are critically important to them, not only because that is how the new EU accession process and methodology is aligned in order, but also because it's what is going to make the fundamental difference here in terms of there being not just a successful entrant into the EU, but a vibrant part of the European Union once they complete that process and they join that membership. So those reform processes are difficult. I think that is an area that is important for North Macedonia to focus on. They are, and I know the Deputy Prime Minister will speak to that directly, but given all of this space, I think it's also important to look at North Macedonia as a success story. In terms of NATO, it has shown the region that that strong modernization efforts, reform efforts can put you in good stead, be part of this important alliance. If that's your path and your choice. On EU accession, they have done a lot of the hard work already. There is still more work to be done, but that should send a promising signal, again, to other countries in the region that the EU enlargement process is moving forward. And hopefully it sends a strong message to other members of the European community about how important it is to complete that project and to build out that vision of that Europe whole, free, and at peace, a unified bloc of democracies working in concert for common prosperity. And I am very optimistic about the potential here, but also about the potential leadership role that North Macedonia will play.
I couldn't agree more. North Macedonia is obviously punching above its weight in so many different ways. I want to bring sort of the conversation a little bit more locally for the Deputy Prime Minister and talk to us a little bit more about Open Balkan in this initiative that's been going on for the past couple of years, and how this how it operates when it was established, and how it's influencing the process to join the EU. So if you could talk about Open Balkan, that would be great.
Sure, Paul. I would just catch up a bit on what the ambassador mentioned with a few sentences, and then I'll turn to Open Balkan. I think we are very motivated to go on with the reforms and with what we need to do according to the expectations of our citizens, and as part of the negotiations with the EU, and as part of strengthening our democratic system and institutions. But I can also say that in the past 5-6 years, we have done really a lot in the area of development of our system and institutions. I can tell you that we have organized census of the population for first time after 20 years, which couldn't happen back in 2011. We also have put away from the table the topic of free and fair elections, because I think it is the system of elections is only improving, and the results have not been disputed by any of the political parties, which is a big success for development of our democratic institutions, because we used to have a lot of issues with that a decade ago in backsliding over in the time of Gruevski. But this is certainly not enough. But this is enough to motivate us to go further on and to work more to achieve to deserve our EU membership, and to actually reflect the success with NATO. We don't want just to be members of the European Union. We would like to be a valuable member of the European Union that can actually contribute to economic development, to stability of this region, and to democratic development of the European institutions. We know this is an issue in the EU, and we would like really to be a positive factor in the European Union, just as we are giving the same effort for NATO, and we would like to be a good ally, not because we are the newest ally, but so we need to show that we are a good ally, but because we really strongly believe in what we do, and we strongly believe that the place of North Macedonia is in NATO and in the EU. Speaking about regional cooperation and Open Balkan initiative, North Macedonia has always been a big fan, big supporter of all the regional initiatives. We've been participating in the Berlin process, which was initiated by former Chancellor Merkel, and we have given our best. We have given our best in that initiative. Unfortunately, at one point, that initiative has been in slowdown, and now we are expecting some revival of this initiative this November, as the Chancellor Scholz announced. In the meantime, we have launched together with Albania and Serbia this new initiative, Open Balkan. First, it was named as Mini Schengen, and later renamed as Open Balkan. Is a regionally authentic initiative coming from, at the same time, leaders of that time of Serbia, North Macedonia, and Albania. It came at the same time when the enlargement process of the European Union was in a stalemate, and was an attempt to really reinvigorate and re-inject some optimism and self-confidence in this region. And at the end of the day, to make the daily life of all the Western Balkan citizens easier. Western Balkans is still one of the rare areas in Europe where we don't have free movement of people, free movement of capital, free movement of products, and of course services. So we wanted to practically open more opportunities for citizens and businesses with these opportunities for free movement, make the borders less solid, make the institutions more effective, and make the mobility of the people in this region higher, and by that decrease tensions on a long run. Of course, we would like to have all of this in line with the EU norms and standards, because our end game, our end goal is not to become to stay only members of Open Balkan, but members of the European Union. So we don't perceive it as a substitute for our EU membership. At the same time, North Macedonia is one of the countries that insists on keeping the doors open for all the 6 countries in the region, in the Western Balkans. When you hear from our leaders of the Western Balkan countries dissonant and even opposing tones about the idea or initiative of the Open Balkans, I assure you that it is not because of our concerns about the Open Balkans. We are mature enough to understand that it is good for everyone, but we are also mature enough to feel the let's say, concerns of some European leaders to our admission to the family, and so we would like this initiative to blossom. We would like to involve Montenegro, to involve Kosovo, to involve Bosnia and Herzegovina, and to really move the region forward. We need more good news from this region. We need to bring the European way of life here in this region to make it real. We don't need more barriers, we need more cooperation.
That's a really good point about open borders, open cooperation. Your point about this region being sort of one of the more closed regions when it comes to open borders that leads to insecurity in whatnot. We've had a great discussion so far, and the time has gone by very quickly. We're almost at 45 minutes, and I know we don't want to take much more of your time, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask each of you just about the implications of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, how that's impacting the region, I know this is very broad, but what North Macedonia and the Balkans can do to, one, wean itself off of Russian energy. Also, to discuss, really quickly, Russian disinformation and how that's having, and propaganda, and how that's having an impact in the region. So I'm going to, kind of have you guys tie it up in a little bow about these big issues. And Dr. Farkas, I'm going to turn to you first, and then we'll go to the ambassador and give the Deputy Prime Minister the last word on his own country.
That sounds fair to me. Well, again, thank you for all the great inputs here. Look, the latest phase of the war against Ukraine being waged by Russia has made it more urgent for us to consolidate democracy, not just in the Balkans, but across the world. So the context is important. The geopolitical context is important. And Russia is bearing down, with increased pressure on those countries that are trying to become NATO members and EU members. And of course, they're using energy as one of their tools in their arsenal, as they have for decades now, blackmailing and pressuring countries that rely on Russian oil and in particular gas. So it's important to achieve energy diversity. It's frustrating for those of us who have been working and following that very important issue for at least a decade, to see how slow the progress has been, and how the fact of the Russian, invasion of Ukraine in 2014 was what was required to really get Western Europeans in particular energized on this front. But now it is also increasing the pressure on the Balkan countries. Greece and Turkey are pivotal when it comes to energy diversification. They either are, transit sources, or they can also help provide access to new sources. So those countries are important. overall, the Balkans cooperation needs to really improve. And I think that's part of what I was talking about when I said I would love to see a new energy that the Deputy Prime Minister mentioned as well in the context of North Macedonia leading. But I would like to see more countries, stepping up and doing things that they had not foreseen they would do before in the name of greater integration, supporting democracy, and frankly, protecting the region against Russian subversive political and military activity and intelligence activity, I should say, certainly when it comes to Serbia. So, and I did not mention Kosovo, and I should have earlier, because that's also really an area where we need to see much more imagination and political courage on the part of all the Balkan countries and Western Europe when it comes to allowing Russia to use Serbia and Russia together to have a veto over Kosovo's integration into the NATO and European Union. So those are kind of my broad comments, but I look forward to hearing from the Ambassador and Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Dr. Farkas. Ambassador, final
Thank
word.
you. Yeah, I mean, that's a big thing to try to tie up, but a good point. I mean, obviously, what Russia has done in Ukraine remains increasingly of concern here in North Macedonia. And again, having worked very closely with this government here, I'm proud of the fact that we have been able to communicate directly and forthrightly on this, and their strong support and their strong positioning on this issue and taking a long-term. We're going to continue to have those conversations, and I know that we can continue to rely on them in NATO, but also in terms of their direct relationship with Ukraine to be a strong partner in that thing. As Dr. Farkas said, what Russia's actions in Ukraine have done in one respect is crystallize the importance of priorities that we've been working on for a long time here, and really brought home the importance of completing some of the work that has been done, again, to strengthen first and foremost the democratic institutions here, to support not just the rule of law efforts, but the incredible efforts, and the Deputy Prime Minister mentioned some of this, in building a strong civil society, a vibrant and independent media, which is, by the way, also one of the most appropriate answers to disinformation, and that is transparency and information. So again, when we're looking at that kind of threat that Russia poses, it posed that threat before, it's more critical now in many respects, but it is going to be a challenge that we face in the future. We have to invest in disinformation efforts, but most importantly, we have to invest in a strong media, an educated and aware citizenry, open channels of communication, and vibrant conversation and dialogue to respond to that. Energy remains a critical issue. We have had conversations in this region about the importance of energy independence for a long period of time. Those are difficult decisions to make, but they have crystallized efforts and focus here, and our conversations, and we'll actually be joining the government of North Macedonia in some regional meetings in the coming weeks and months to talk about how to advance some of these projects. I think it's important that there be regional level discussions. North Macedonia is a small market for energy, but because it is so incredibly tied, and there are new opportunities with neighboring countries, there's a way to look at this region to help it break that dependence on Russian gas, but also, more importantly, longer term, to move towards renewable energy so that they can be resilient as they move forward. I would say the same thing is true on the economic front. North Macedonia faces many of the same economic pressures that we do in the United States, throughout Europe, but there are opportunities as this continent relooks at supply chains and how critical goods and commodities get to Europe. North Macedonia can actually be, both as a transit and a production country, a part of a future program that helps not just the country and the region become more independent in the face of global threats, but also part of the solution, part of the answer. And I think, to wrap this all up, this is a country that for 30 years of its independence has faced painful challenges and kept its eyes on that greater goal of Euro-Atlantic integration, of building a better future for its citizens. And I think that is, where I'd like to leave this conversation, we should be inspired by their example, by their willingness and their consistency and their determination to press ahead no matter the challenges, because they know what kind of future that they want to have. And I assess that some of the challenges will be difficult in the period ahead, but we have a strong partnership. We have a strong framework through the strategic dialogue. We have our NATO Alliance, and now we have shared goals in their EU accession process that I think will help us keep us on track, working together towards a better and brighter future, not just for North Macedonia, but for the region.
Ambassador, thank you so much for those comments, and thank you for being such a champion for North Macedonia. Obviously, you're concluding your service there, so I think your hard work is really paying off, and appreciate everything that you've done to move North Macedonia in the right direction, and the United States support. And we're going to give the last word to the Deputy Prime Minister, and then after that, just some closing comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. This is an excellent question for conclusion. But before I go to the question, I would just like to commend Ambassador Burns for her very successful, in my opinion, historic term for North Macedonia, because we became a NATO member and we have achieved so many things during her work in North Macedonia, and I hope that North Macedonia will remain as a positive experience with positive memories from her work here and her stay here. But turning now to your question about the influence or the implications of the Russian invasion to Ukraine, and also of the threats of the Russian aggression of information in this region, I can tell you that North Macedonia was, as I mentioned, one of the first that took the decision to align with the packages of restrictive measures against Russia, adopted by EU and our partners, thus achieving 100% of the alignment with the common foreign and security policy. And in this way, we have clearly demonstrated that we stand against all forms and acts of aggression and violence, and that we strongly believe in what we do, regardless of the consequences, because otherwise we would have to suffer consequences of our system of values, which I think is not acceptable for us at the moment. More and more often in the political security context, both at the national and international level, the expressions like hybrid war, threats, danger are heard more often, and sometimes even felt in practice. Because of that, on several occasions, our government took rigid but justified measures of dismissing some Russian diplomats. In many phases, the last tour was 11 Russian diplomats expelled. It is about unconventional threats that are produced in order to undermine or harm someone's reputation and status, regardless of whether it is an individual, group, institution, state as a whole, the system, the democratic system. We have encountered numerous examples of hybrid operations, such as hacking attacks, disinformation, fake news, particularly managing on the social media. But what actually makes these things dangerous is the fact that they are usually the product of specific centers that are not physically located in the territory targeted for attack, and thus are much more difficult to prevent and to manage. The speed, the extent, and the intensity of hybrid threats have increased over the last years, particularly in the last months. Therefore, the resistance, the resilience, prevention, and preparedness for response to hybrid threats are top-notch priority for our country. For this purpose, in April 2021, the government of the Republic of North Macedonia adopted a strategy for building resilience and dealing with hybrid threats. This is a strategic document that should result in the creation of a national capability for successfully dealing with these multi-faceted threats and crises, which aim to endanger our society and democratic values. It actually aims to destabilize the functioning of the national authorities and to put the democratic system under question. But I would only conclude with the dependence on our country on the Russian imports, but also the matter of the Russian gas. In general, North Macedonia does not have a high level of trade integration with Russia. To the contrary, we are quite integrated in the EU system of trade. For example, in 2021, the total imports from Russia amounted to 1.5% of the total imports. and the total exports to Russia to 0.7% of the total exports. The picture is quite opposite when it comes to the gas dependence. North Macedonia does not have natural gas reserves, and we practically completely rely on the gas imports, particularly from Russia. The only operational gas interconnector is through Bulgaria at the moment. This is why we were very interested and we gladly participate in launching the construction of the gas interconnector with Greece, a project of strategic significance for the country, as it will enhance the energy security by diversifying gas supply sources. North Macedonia's strategic location and connection to Greece via the pipeline with open opportunities to transport also national gas to Kosovo, Albania, Serbia potentially, allowing those markets to benefit from low-cost natural gas. But on this, I think it will be the key indicator for winning the hearts and minds of the people of North Macedonia. If in the difficult times ahead of us, in the upcoming winter, they can recognize the solidarity and putting North Macedonia in the system of the gas supply for European Union and assistance of the United States, that we are less dependent on Russian gas, it will certainly win the hearts of minds and the people and see that we are not left alone in difficult times, which will be part of the Russian propaganda, that we can not move forward without the Russian gas. So we should all bear this in mind, and North Macedonia's government will do everything to make North Macedonia less dependent on Russian gas and be put in the system of gas supply, just as all the other EU member states and NATO allies. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you to all of our panelists today. Thank you, Dr. Farkas. Thank you, Ambassador Burns. And again, thank you, Deputy Prime Minister Maricic. We want to thank all of you for your insight and just the importance of highlighting what's going on in North Macedonia, its integration not only into NATO, but into the European structures. We've learned a lot today. We hope our viewers and future viewers learn a lot today, and we are proud supporters of North Macedonia and its efforts of further integration into Europe. As our namesake, Senator John McCain was such a champion of these issues. We champion your issues as well. And a special, happy independence to all of you, 31 years of independence from Yugoslavia. So this is a tremendous time in your own history. But again, thank all of you for joining us today, and thank you to the audience for joining us as well.